Hello, friends. If you're curious about the movie Nonnas, released in 2025, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to give this video a quick like, it really helps us out. And if you're new here, hit subscribe to stay updated on all the latest movie deep dives. Let's jump right in. There's something about the clatter of pots in a warm kitchen, the hum of an old radio playing Neapolitan love songs, the way steam rises from a simmering red sauce like a memory finding its way back home. This is a film steeped not in fantasy, not in high-stakes spectacle, but in something far more elusive, heart. It's a story that doesn't announce itself with loud dialogue or sweeping vistas. Instead, it unfolds gently, like a well-worn family recipe passed down in hushed, flower-dusted whispers. The first thing that strikes you isn't the plot. It's the feeling. A tenderness baked into every scene. A richness in the air, like the smell of garlic and basil that seems to cling to your clothes long after you've left the kitchen. It's a movie that wraps around you slowly, without permission, and by the time you realize what's happening, you're already inside it. Laughing, tearing up, and falling in love with people who feel like relatives you haven't met yet. The story centers on a charming, somewhat lost 30-something man, whose life has drifted far from the path he once dreamed of. He's not a failure. Not exactly. But he's stuck. Haunted by decisions he didn't make and dreams he left simmering on the back burner for too long. And just when he's beginning to accept the slow fading of his spark, a strange opportunity lands in his lap, to travel to Italy and apprentice under a group of grandmothers. Not chefs. Not culinary stars. But nonnas. Real women. Fierce, funny, and wielding wooden spoons like scepters. It begins in a small coastal town, where time moves differently and nobody's in much of a hurry unless you're late for lunch. He's out of place instantly, a New Yorker through and through, with takeout habits and a fridge full of nothing. But here, in a sun-dappled village that feels lifted from an old postcard, he finds himself surrounded by women who have lived centuries of wisdom in just 80 years. They don't speak much English. He doesn't speak much Italian. But food, as it turns out, doesn't need translation. The nonnas don't teach by instruction. They teach by doing. They slap his hands when he rolls the dough wrong. They raise eyebrows when he reaches for store-bought ricotta. They share stories in half-muttered Italian, stories he doesn't always understand but feels deep in his chest. One tells of making wedding soup during wartime. Another of feeding 8 children with 1 pot of beans and faith. Their lessons aren't just culinary, they're spiritual. They're ancestral. And slowly, something inside him begins to reawaken. As he fumbles through sauces and frittatas, something else simmers beneath the surface. A local woman, prickly and warm-hearted, whose relationship with him begins with arguments and ends. Well, that's part of the charm. Their connection is gradual, like a dish that takes hours to bloom. Nothing about it is rushed. There are no grand declarations, no manufactured chemistry. Just 2 people learning to speak the same language one shared meal at a time. But the film doesn't stay sweet for long. Beneath the laughter and pasta-making, there's a deeper thread, a sense of loss that weaves through every meal. One of the nonnas is growing forgetful. Another keeps a photo by her stove of a son who never came home. And as the apprentice grows closer to them, he realizes they're not just teaching him how to cook, they're passing something on. A way of life. A memory. A legacy. And that legacy has a timer. Midway through, just when everything seems to be settling, a storm rolls in. Not a metaphorical one. A real one. The restaurant they've been building together, the one he thought might give him a second chance, is flooded. Recipes are lost. Ingredients ruined. Spirits broken. And in that chaos, all the warmth and ease the film built comes crashing into sharp reality. Life, it reminds us, isn't a postcard. It's messy, sudden, unfair. And yet, this is where the story shines brightest. Because in that moment of despair, it's the nonnas who rally, who dig into their garden-grown strength and say, "We've seen worse." They remind him that good things take time, that the best dishes are often born from hardship, that a meal, like a life, is not ruined by one wrong ingredient. And so, with borrowed pans and bruised egos, they start again. What follows is not a grand comeback, but a quiet triumph. A new dish, inspired by the old. A meal served not to critics, but to neighbors. A table filled not with food, but with love. And when the apprentice finally returns to New York, he's not the same man. He doesn't open a Michelin star restaurant. He doesn't become a celebrity. He opens a small kitchen, invites people in, teaches what he's learned. And in the final scene, as he prepares a meal for his own mother, who once tried and failed to teach him how to boil water, we see it. The full circle. The inherited grace. The subtle miracle of transformation. This is not a movie about food. It's a movie about what food holds: stories, pain, joy, memory. It's about the women who remember more than recipes. The men who learn to listen. The flavors we carry long after the last bite is gone. And as the credits roll, you'll find yourself thinking about your own grandmother. About the smell of her kitchen. The way she stirred sauce with one hand and scolded you with the other. You'll remember the first time you realized food wasn't just something to eat, it was something to feel. Because that's what this story does. It feeds you. It fills you. And long after it's over, it stays with you. It begins not with fanfare or flourish, but with quiet resignation. A man standing in the kitchen of his modest New York apartment, staring into a nearly empty fridge, the light buzzing faintly above stale takeout containers and half-forgotten condiments. His name is Leo, and he's not exactly unhappy, but happiness feels like something that's passed him by. He's in his 30s, stuck somewhere between ambition and inertia, a culinary school dropout working in a corporate office where no one really remembers his name. His dreams of becoming a chef now feel like a joke he once told himself too many times to still find funny. There's a heaviness to his mornings, a blur to his evenings, the days marked not by moments but by routines. Microwave beeps, subway screeches, and the gentle thud of his neighbor's footsteps overhead become the rhythm of a life on autopilot. He eats alone, walks alone, lives in a silence so familiar it barely registers anymore. Until one phone call breaks it. His uncle Enzo, a boisterous character from his childhood memories and distant family reunions, calls from Italy. The voice on the other end is warm, weathered, and immediate, bursting through the static with tales of a village project, of Nonnas who need help, and of a kitchen unlike anything Leo's ever known. There's no real explanation, just an invitation. Come to Campania, stay for the summer, cook with the Nonnas. They'll teach you something, Enzo says, if you have ears to listen. Leo laughs it off. It's absurd. He can't just up and leave. He has work, rent, responsibilities. But that night, after spilling ramen on his shirt and staring too long at a photo of himself at 20, the village is smaller than he remembers. Nestled between sunburned hills and olive groves that whisper in the breeze, it feels like a place untouched by time. The kind of place where people still say buongiorno to every passerby and the church bell chimes not just for hours, but for memories. Enzo meets him at the station, arms wide, laughter loud, heart larger than life. They drive in a sputtering Fiat through winding roads that smell like cypress and soil, until they arrive at a stone house with a crooked chimney and a wooden sign out front that simply says La Cucina del Non. The Nonnas are already there. 5 of them. Each one a universe of stories wrapped in aprons and dusted in flour. There's Assunta, small but sharp as a cleaver. Rosa, the quiet observer with eyes like still water. Julia, loud and loving and always first to refill your plate. Maria, the oldest, who moves slowly but sees everything. And Lucia, with a wit as dry as the wine she pours. They welcome Leo not with ceremony, but with skepticism. He's a man, young, too skinny, too soft. Does he even know how to knead? Assunta mutters. Leo, too jet-lagged to argue, just smiles. The first morning, they put him to work. No introductions. No lessons. Just a bowl of flour and a pair of calloused hands pushing his gently aside. "Watch," Rosa says. "Then try." He does. He fails. The dough is too wet. The sauce is too thin. He burns the eggplant and drops a tray of sfogliatelle. But he doesn't quit. And that they seem to respect. Days fall into rhythm. Early mornings with baskets of vegetables from the garden. Midday heat that drives everyone indoors for espresso and silence. Afternoons in the kitchen, where the air smells like garlic and old secrets. The Nonnas don't measure. They feel. They stir with instinct, not precision. And slowly, Leo begins to learn, not just their techniques, but their stories. Assunta speaks of her husband, who built their first oven by hand. Rosa lost a brother in the war and still folds napkins the way he did. Julia never had children, but raised 3 generations of neighbors. Maria's hands shake when she chops, but her pasta is perfect every time. Lucia tells him how to cut onions and how to leave a man who doesn't love you right. These aren't cooking lessons. They're life. And Leo, in their orbit, begins to change. He laughs more. He eats slower. He learns that some recipes aren't written down because they live in muscle memory and smell and love. He starts writing again, scribbling notes not just on technique but on feeling. He helps paint the walls of the kitchen, plants basil with Julia, listens to opera with Maria. His phone rings less. His mind races less. He sleeps better. But not everything is idyllic. He meets Francesca at the market. She sells olives and judgment in equal measure. Younger than the Nonnas, older than Leo, with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. Their first conversation is a fight. He calls her stubborn. She calls him clueless. But she helps him choose better tomatoes. And when he thanks her, she pretends not to hear. They keep meeting, at the market, in the square, at Enzo's Sunday dinners. Each encounter filled with friction that slowly, delicately, begins to warm. She teases him about his accent. He mocks her playlist. They argue about food, about family, about why she never left and why he did. There's something unspoken between them, something slow and simmering, like a sauce that needs time. He doesn't push. She doesn't ask. But there's a moment, one late night on the steps outside her home, when the town is asleep and the stars are bright, where neither of them speaks, and yet everything is said. Back in the kitchen, a change is coming. Enzo announces plans to turn the Nonnas' cooking into something bigger, a culinary retreat, a small restaurant where tourists can learn from the masters. It's ambitious, risky. But the Nonnas agree, reluctantly, knowing that if their traditions are to live on, they must evolve. Leo is offered a role. To lead, to organize, to be the bridge between generations. It's overwhelming. He didn't come here to find purpose. But now, it's finding him. One evening, as he preps for a dinner service for the village's mayor, he finds Rosa in the garden, sitting in the dirt, confused. She's forgotten why she came outside. Forgotten Leo's name. Later, Julia whispers that Rosa has been forgetting more lately. That it's getting worse. That the recipes are still in her hands, but fading from her mind. The mood shifts. The Nonnas laugh less. Cook slower. And Leo begins to realize that this isn't just a kitchen. It's a passing. A handing down. These women won't be here forever. And what they're offering isn't just food, it's time. It's heritage. It's the last breath of something that might disappear if it isn't held on to, cherished, taught. He begins to record. Not just on paper, but on film. He interviews them, documents their movements, preserves every flick of the wrist, every joke told while chopping onions. And in doing so, he starts to feel something he hasn't in years. Meaning. Then the storm comes. A literal one. Heavy rain, swelling rivers, flooding roads. The kitchen, newly refurbished, takes on water. Ingredients ruined. Walls soaked. Events cancelled. The restaurant dream, barely born, looks broken. And with it, Leo feels something inside him crack. He wants to quit. Go home. Say it was all a lovely dream that reality ruined. But then, Assunta slaps flour on the counter. Julia rolls up her sleeves. Lucia pulls out a cookbook older than the town itself. Maria hums a hymn and starts slicing tomatoes with the same focus she's always had. And Rosa, bless her fading memory, folds napkins perfectly, just like her brother taught her. Because for them, there is no giving up. Only cooking. Only sharing. Only love. Leo stays. And the story, his story, is far from over. The morning after the storm is silent. Not the kind of peaceful silence Leo had come to love, the one filled with birdsong and the soft rustle of olive trees, but a silence thick with sadness. The kind that lingers after damage. The kind that leaves behind questions no one's ready to ask. The kitchen is soaked. Walls are streaked with water. The pantry floor is covered in ruined bags of flour, onions floating in a sad, quiet pool. The oven, still intact, hums faintly, as if refusing to die with the rest of it. And the chairs, those old wooden chairs that had held laughter and stories for decades, are upside down, legs reaching out like they're begging to be saved. The Nonnas arrive in pairs, in worn coats and rain boots, looking like generals returning to a battlefield that's already lost. Rosa stands in the doorway, her memory flickering like a faulty light bulb, and asks if they've come to make Sunday sauce. No one answers her. Julia starts sweeping. Maria clutches a small jar of preserved tomatoes like a child holding a teddy bear. And Lucia mutters something about needing more garlic, even though there's none left to chop. Leo stands in the middle of it all, frozen. He feels useless. Like the dream slipped between his fingers overnight. Like the second chance he didn't know he was chasing has been drowned. But Enzo doesn't let him fall into silence for long. We rebuild, he says, simply. As if there's no other option. And somehow, that's enough. The next few days become a slow resurrection. Villagers arrive with tools and planks of wood, offering hands, food, wine. The mayor writes a check, modest but symbolic. The next few days become a slow resurrection. Villagers arrive with tools and planks of wood, offering hands, food, wine. The mayor writes a check, modest but symbolic. Francesca shows up with crates of fresh vegetables and a "don't you dare thank me" glare. And Leo, lost in the rhythm of fixing things, begins to find himself again. He patches walls. Reshelves jars. Rewrites menus. He does it all with sore hands and a full heart. And in the process, the restaurant begins to shift, not just physically, but spiritually. It stops being just a project. It becomes a mission. A promise. They call it La Tavola della Memoria, the table of memory. And as the name suggests, it isn't just a restaurant. It's a love letter. To the women who stirred pots through war and grief. To the hands that fed generations. To the stories that were nearly forgotten. To Rosa. Her decline is steady, like a candle nearing its wick. Some days she's fully present, humming lullabies and kneading dough with her eyes closed, her muscle memory defying time. Other days, she stares out the window, searching for someone who isn't coming back. It breaks Leo's heart in ways he can't explain. And one morning, after she mistakes him for her son, he doesn't correct her. He just holds her hand and listens. And it's in those moments, soft, aching, invisible to most, that the film finds its soul. The kitchen comes back to life slowly. New shelves. Hand-painted menus. A long farmhouse table built by Enzo and Leo, stained with wine and sealed with hope. And when the doors open again, it isn't to tourists or critics. It's to the villagers, to neighbors, to people who know the weight of a shared meal. They don't charge. Not yet. They just serve. One course, one memory at a time. And something miraculous begins to happen. The food tastes better. Not because of technique, not because of ingredients, but because of intention. Every bite carries a story. Every dish is explained. Why Maria uses 2 types of tomatoes in her sugo, how Julia's father used to stretch meatballs with breadcrumbs and love, why Assunta insists on grating the pecorino herself. The meals become rituals, lessons, communions. Word spreads. Slowly, then all at once. A journalist visits, writes an article that goes viral. The story of the lost New York chef who found his soul in the hills of Italy. Of the Nonnas who cooked through memory loss and heartbreak. Of a restaurant where time doesn't exist, only taste and tenderness. Requests pour in. From travelers. From chefs. From culinary schools wanting to partner. Television producers float offers. One even proposes a reality show, Kitchen Queens, or something equally ridiculous. Leo says no to all of it. But one email catches his eye. His old boss in New York, the one who once told him his dreams were too soft, reaches out with a job offer. Executive chef. High-end. High profile. High salary. He doesn't reply. Not right away. Instead, he walks the streets at night, thinking. Talks to Francesca. She listens, mostly. Until finally, she says, "You came here to find something. Maybe now you need to decide whether you keep it or trade it for something easier." It hits him harder than he expects. And that's when the next shift arrives. Rosa disappears. One morning, she simply isn't there. The village becomes a blur of panic. Everyone searching, calling her name, checking shops, gardens, alleys. And eventually, they find her, sitting by the tree at the edge of the vineyard, humming softly, her apron folded in her lap. When Leo kneels beside her, she looks at him and smiles. "You look just like my grandson," she says. He breaks. Not loudly, not with tears, but with silence. And in that silence he knows. This isn't temporary. Time is not just passing, it's claiming. And if he doesn't hold on to what matters now, he never will. He turns down the New York job. Politely. Firmly. And instead, he begins to build something lasting. A cookbook. But not the glossy kind. This one is hand-bound, with photos, sketches, notes scribbled in the margins. Each chapter dedicated to a Nonna. Their recipes. Their stories. Their laughs. Their heartbreaks. La Tavola della Memoria becomes more than a restaurant. It becomes a school. A sanctuary. A living archive. And as the seasons shift, so does Leo. He stops waiting for permission to be who he is. He loves more openly, speaks more freely. His hands, once clumsy and unsure, now move with purpose. He teaches, but never stops learning. From Maria's silence, from Julia's laughter, from Rosa's fading voice, and from Francesca. Their love is quiet, real. No fireworks. Just a slow, steady burn that refuses to go out. She helps him run the restaurant, paints murals on the walls, plants sunflowers by the window. They fight, sometimes, but they always come back to the kitchen, to the place where it started. One final scene. Leo standing in front of a class of young chefs. He's holding Rosa's wooden spoon. It's cracked, worn, beautiful. He smiles. Behind him, the Nonnas sit at the table, watching, guiding, living. He says, "We're not just cooking food. We're cooking memory." And the camera pulls back. The kitchen. The village. The hills. Alive. Still singing. It's rare for a story to gather characters who don't feel constructed, but instead lived in, like they existed long before the camera found them and will keep breathing long after the credits fade. In this quiet corner of the Italian countryside, that's exactly what we're given. Characters not built around drama, but around heartbeats. Around gestures. Around meals and memories and the spaces between words. These are not archetypes. They're not even just people. They are traditions wrapped in skin. Love given form. And through their struggles and small triumphs, they teach us that character isn't what's spoken aloud. It's what's felt. Leo, at first glance, isn't anyone special. And that's the point. He's not written to dazzle or dominate. He's written to reflect, a mirror of every person who's ever felt the ache of potential slipping through their fingers. He enters the story with a weariness not born of trauma, but of slow, invisible defeat. His life in New York is all muted tones and microwave dinners, an existence marked by avoidance. Not a man running from disaster, but from disappointment. He once dreamed in bold flavors, in Michelin stars and rustic trattorias, but the dream soured into something safer, smaller, and far less risky, and then comes the call. The shift. Not a heroic decision, but a hesitant step onto a path he doesn't quite believe in yet. His journey to Italy isn't noble, it's uncertain. And that's what makes it human. When he arrives, he doesn't try to prove himself. He flinches when scolded, fumbles in the kitchen, winces under the Nonnas' scrutiny. But what makes Leo magnetic, beneath all his uncertainty, is his willingness. To fail. To learn. To be humbled. He listens. That becomes his quiet superpower. In a world obsessed with performance, Leo becomes a character rooted in presence. He starts absorbing more than just recipes. He starts absorbing stories. And through those stories, something begins to repair within him. His posture changes. His voice softens. He doesn't become someone else. He becomes himself, finally. But he doesn't carry the story alone. He's surrounded by the Nonnas, each one a chapter in a book far older and richer than his own. They aren't one character. They are many. They speak not just as individuals, but as voices of ancestry, of matriarchal knowledge passed down through sauce-stained fingers and eyes that have seen too much. Assunta is the fire, tiny in frame but towering in presence. She doesn't ask for respect, she demands it, often with nothing more than a raised eyebrow and a wooden spoon. She speaks like every word costs money. When she corrects Leo's rolling technique, it feels like a sermon. But beneath her steel exterior is an ocean of protectiveness. She's lost people, though we never hear the details. We see it in how she hovers just a little longer over Rosa. How she watches Leo when he isn't looking. She is not a woman who gives easily. But when she does, it's forever. Then there's Rosa, who carries the most delicate weight in the film. She's introduced as one of the core teachers, her hands moving with a grace born of repetition. But as her memory begins to falter, her arc becomes less about teaching and more about being remembered. She is a character defined by loss, not just of the past, but of the present. Her moments of lucidity are heartbreaking in their clarity. When she forgets Leo's name, it's a soft devastation. But when she hums a lullaby while stirring risotto, it feels like a miracle. Rosa's character isn't written to pull tears. She's written to linger. You remember her smile more than her words. You remember how she folds napkins in perfect lines even after forgetting why she picked them up. She is the embodiment of memory, fading, flickering, but stubbornly beautiful. Julia brings levity. She's the laughter in the room, the one who sings off-key while chopping onions, the one who turns every correction into a joke. But she, too, has depth. Her joy is a shield. She never had children of her own, yet her instinct to nurture spills over everything she touches. She mothers Leo without asking, without announcing it. And when he begins to see her as a kind of anchor, it isn't because of her advice, it's because of her presence. She's the warm plate set in front of you when you didn't know you were hungry. Lucia is the sharp tongue. Witty, observant, never afraid to call someone out. Her role isn't as central in plot, but thematically, she becomes essential. She is the voice of survival. The one who reminds everyone that sweetness alone cannot carry tradition. You need bite. You need truth. When she tells Leo about leaving a bad relationship, it's not framed as drama. It's framed as clarity. Her independence is fierce, and her mentorship, though less direct, is no less vital. She teaches him not just how to cook, but how to decide. Maria is the quiet one. The observer. She doesn't speak often, but when she does, it lands like a hymn. Her strength is spiritual, almost mythic. There's a moment where she simply touches Leo's shoulder after a long day, and it feels like an entire conversation. She's the keeper of silence, the embodiment of what it means to hold knowledge without shouting it. In one scene, she speaks of her late husband with a smile so faint you almost miss it. And in that smile, you understand everything. Then there's Francesca. She arrives like a gust of cold air, sharp, skeptical, unimpressed. She challenges Leo from the start, refusing to let his presence go unquestioned. She isn't cruel. She's careful. Her guarded nature is earned. She's lived her whole life in this village. She's watched people come and go. She's seen dreams bloom and wither. Her sharpness is not bitterness, it's protection. And when Leo begins to chip away at her defenses, what's revealed isn't softness, but depth. Francesca is not written as a love interest. She's written as a parallel journey. Like Leo, she has a story of almosts. A path not taken. But where he ran from his past, she stayed and buried hers. Their chemistry isn't immediate. It simmers. It survives arguments and misunderstandings. It grows slowly, like a tomato vine crawling toward sunlight. When they finally connect, it isn't because the plot demands it, it's because their silences have become shared. And when she challenges him to choose between returning to New York or staying, it's not a romantic plea. It's a truth test. She doesn't need him to stay. She needs him to want to. Even Enzo, the uncle, plays a pivotal role in tone. He's the bridge between old and new. Loud, generous, occasionally chaotic, he is the warmth that welcomes Leo into this world. But he also carries history. He understands what's at stake. He isn't just bringing his nephew into an opportunity. He's trying to protect a legacy. His character reminds us that even joy can carry purpose. That laughter can be resistance. Together, these characters form something larger than the sum of their arcs. They create a tapestry, a table filled with generations, with ghosts and dreams and stubborn hope. No one is perfect. No one is finished. And that's what makes them real. Because this isn't a story about heroes. It's a story about people holding onto something sacred and choosing, day after day, not to let it slip away. There are movies that wear their secrets loudly, grand spectacles with high-wire stunts, digital wizardry, or endless marketing fuel. And then, every once in a while, a story unfolds behind the scenes that feels more like a whisper. A trail of breadcrumbs leading through quiet moments, uncanny coincidences, and the kind of strange beauty that you can't plan, only stumble upon. This was one of those productions. And behind the charm of olive groves and bubbling pots, behind the laughter and the slow, sun-kissed storytelling, were a collection of strange, serendipitous, and quietly magical events that gave the making of this film a life entirely of its own. It began with a location scout that felt more like destiny than decision-making. The original plan was to shoot in multiple towns across southern Italy, blending settings to create the illusion of one cohesive village. But when the director and cinematographer stumbled upon a forgotten hilltop town, one not listed on any of their scouting notes, they knew immediately. The narrow cobblestone streets, faded ochre walls, and time-worn kitchens felt less like a film set and more like a dream someone had already dreamt for them. The townspeople, few in number and mostly elderly, greeted the crew with suspicion, until one woman stepped forward with a tray of warm bread, said nothing, and gestured to her kitchen. She would become the inspiration for Julia. And that kitchen. It wasn't just a backdrop. It became the heart of the production. The filmmakers didn't bring in fake counters or polished props. Everything was real: pans that had been seasoned for decades, hand-carved spoons, a wood-burning stove that took nearly an hour to light each morning but was worth every second for the light it cast and the smell it released. The food wasn't styled. It was cooked by locals. Sometimes on camera, sometimes just for the cast and crew between scenes. It was during one of those meals that something odd happened. Vera Montanari, a non-professional actress playing Maria, swore she saw her late mother in a dream the night before her first shoot day. She was standing in the doorway of the set kitchen, Vera said, smiling, saying, "Make sure they get the sauce right." The next day, when they opened the kitchen door, a strong gust blew through and knocked over a single basil pot placed near the window. And then comes the call. The shift. Not a heroic decision, but a hesitant step onto a path he doesn't quite believe in yet. His journey to Italy isn't noble, it's uncertain. And that's what makes it human. When he arrives, he doesn't try to prove himself. He flinches when scolded, fumbles in the kitchen, winces under the Nonnas' scrutiny. But what makes Leo magnetic, beneath all his uncertainty, is his willingness to fail, to learn, to be humbled. He listens. That becomes his quiet superpower. In a world obsessed with performance, Leo becomes a character rooted in presence. He starts absorbing more than just recipes. He starts absorbing stories. And through those stories, something begins to repair within him. His posture changes. His voice softens. He doesn't become someone else. He becomes himself, finally. But he doesn't carry the story alone. He's surrounded by the Nonnas, each one a chapter in a book far older and richer than his own. They aren't one character. They are many. They speak not just as individuals, but as voices of ancestry, of matriarchal knowledge passed down through sauce-stained fingers and eyes that have seen too much. Assunta is the fire, tiny in frame but towering in presence. She doesn't ask for respect, she demands it, often with nothing more than a raised eyebrow and a wooden spoon. She speaks like every word costs money. When she corrects Leo's rolling technique, it feels like a sermon. But beneath her steel exterior is an ocean of protectiveness. She's lost people, though we never hear the details. We see it in how she hovers just a little longer over Rosa. How she watches Leo when he isn't looking. She is not a woman who gives easily. But when she does, it's forever. Then there's Rosa, who carries the most delicate weight in the film. She's introduced as one of the core teachers, her hands moving with a grace born of repetition. But as her memory begins to falter, her arc becomes less about teaching and more about being remembered. She is a character defined by loss, not just of the past, but of the present. Her moments of lucidity are heartbreaking in their clarity. When she forgets Leo's name, it's a soft devastation. But when she hums a lullaby while stirring risotto, it feels like a miracle. Rosa's character isn't written to pull tears. She's written to linger. You remember her smile more than her words. You remember how she folds napkins in perfect lines even after forgetting why she picked them up. She is the embodiment of memory, fading, flickering, but stubbornly beautiful. Julia brings levity. She's the laughter in the room, the one who sings off-key while chopping onions, the one who turns every correction into a joke. But she, too, has depth. Her joy is a shield. She never had children of her own, yet her instinct to nurture spills over everything she touches. She mothers Leo without asking, without announcing it. And when he begins to see her as a kind of anchor, it isn't because of her advice, it's because of her presence. She's the warm plate set in front of you when you didn't know you were hungry. Lucia is the sharp tongue. Witty, observant, never afraid to call someone out. Her role isn't as central in plot, but thematically, she becomes essential. She is the voice of survival. The one who reminds everyone that sweetness alone cannot carry tradition. You need bite. You need truth. When she tells Leo about leaving a bad relationship, it's not framed as drama. It's framed as clarity. Her independence is fierce, and her mentorship, though less direct, is no less vital. She teaches him not just how to cook, but how to decide. Maria is the quiet one. The observer. She doesn't speak often, but when she does, it lands like a hymn. Her strength is spiritual, almost mythic. There's a moment where she simply touches Leo's shoulder after a long day, and it feels like an entire conversation. She's the keeper of silence, the embodiment of what it means to hold knowledge without shouting it. In one scene, she speaks of her late husband with a smile so faint you almost miss it. And in that smile, you understand everything. Then there's Francesca. She arrives like a gust of cold air, sharp, skeptical, unimpressed. She challenges Leo from the start, refusing to let his presence go unquestioned. She isn't cruel. She's careful. Her guarded nature is earned. She's lived her whole life in this village. She's watched people come and go. She's seen dreams bloom and wither. Her sharpness is not bitterness, it's protection. And when Leo begins to chip away at her defenses, what's revealed isn't softness, but depth. Francesca is not written as a love interest. She's written as a parallel journey. Like Leo, she has a story of almosts. A path not taken. But where he ran from his past, she stayed and buried hers. Their chemistry isn't immediate. It simmers. It survives arguments and misunderstandings. It grows slowly, like a tomato vine crawling toward sunlight. When they finally connect, it isn't because the plot demands it, it's because their silences have become shared. And when she challenges him to choose between returning to New York or staying, it's not a romantic plea. It's a truth test. She doesn't need him to stay. She needs him to want to. Even Enzo, the uncle, plays a pivotal role in tone. He's the bridge between old and new. Loud, generous, occasionally chaotic, he is the warmth that welcomes Leo into this world. But he also carries history. He understands what's at stake. He isn't just bringing his nephew into an opportunity. He's trying to protect a legacy. His character reminds us that even joy can carry purpose. That laughter can be resistance. Together, these characters form something larger than the sum of their arcs. They create a tapestry, a table filled with generations, with ghosts and dreams and stubborn hope. No one is perfect. No one is finished. And that's what makes them real. Because this isn't a story about heroes. It's a story about people holding onto something sacred and choosing, day after day, not to let it slip away. There are movies that wear their secrets loudly, grand spectacles with high-wire stunts, digital wizardry, or endless marketing fuel. And then, every once in a while, a story unfolds behind the scenes that feels more like a whisper. A trail of breadcrumbs leading through quiet moments, uncanny coincidences, and the kind of strange beauty that you can't plan, only stumble upon. This was one of those productions. And behind the charm of olive groves and bubbling pots, behind the laughter and the slow, sun-kissed storytelling, were a collection of strange, serendipitous, and quietly magical events that gave the making of this film a life entirely of its own. It began with a location scout that felt more like destiny than decision-making. The original plan was to shoot in multiple towns across southern Italy, blending settings to create the illusion of one cohesive village. But when the director and cinematographer stumbled upon a forgotten hilltop town, one not listed on any of their scouting notes, they knew immediately. The narrow cobblestone streets, faded ochre walls, and time-worn kitchens felt less like a film set and more like a dream someone had already dreamt for them. The townspeople, few in number and mostly elderly, greeted the crew with suspicion, until one woman stepped forward with a tray of warm bread, said nothing, and gestured to her kitchen. At the center of the film is a series of seemingly modest events: a man arriving in a village, a kitchen that needs rebuilding, grandmothers who need dough and memories with the same reverent touch. But to treat these events as simple plot points would be to misunderstand their gravity. Each scene is a memory in the making, a moment shaped by layers of inheritance. And through the critic's lens, these moments reveal themselves not as sweet distractions, but as cultural reclamation. Take the early moment when Leo first fumbles with dough under Assunta's stern gaze. It plays, at first, as humor, classic fish-out-of-water awkwardness. But critically, that scene is doing something more. It's deconstructing ego. In an era of hypercompetence, where protagonists must prove themselves immediately, this film says, sit down, watch, listen. Leo's failure isn't framed as defeat. It's framed as an opening, a door creaking open to humility. And in that humility, the film establishes its thematic root. Transformation doesn't begin with knowledge. It begins with surrender. Critics highlighted this refusal to rush. The pacing, intentional and lyrical, became a point of both praise and curiosity. It moves like a memory, one critic wrote, as if the film itself is remembering rather than performing. That quality shaped the audience's experience. The events don't arrive with orchestral cues or sweeping camera movements. They arrive like stories passed around a table. Softly. And that softness becomes a rebellion of its own. When the village kitchen floods after the storm, it's not framed as devastation for shock value. The event arrives quietly, almost gently. The silence after the rain is more painful than any collapse. What this moment does, from a critical perspective, is shatter illusion, not just for the characters, but for the viewers. Until this point, the film glows with idyllic warmth. The flooding is the turning point. It reminds us that even the most beautiful traditions can be lost to time, to nature, to forgetting. Critics recognize this moment as the axis around which the entire narrative pivots, not because of what is destroyed, but because of what is revealed. The community response to the flood, where neighbors come to rebuild without being asked, becomes a cinematic thesis on collectivism. While most films lean into the hero's journey, this film quietly dismantles it. There is no singular savior. No one character carries the solution. It is, instead, a table being built, not by one person, but by many hands. Critics were struck by how radical this felt in today's cinematic landscape. It dares to show that healing is communal, another reviewer noted. That strength is not the absence of weakness, but the presence of others. Then there's Rosa. Her character arc, soft, tragic, inevitable, is among the film's most profound. From a narrative perspective, Rosa's memory loss could have been reduced to a simple emotional anchor, a tear-jerker. But the film resists that temptation. Instead, her decline is framed with grace, not pity. It unfolds in subtle gestures: her pause at the garden gate, her confusion in the pantry, her moment of clarity when folding napkins the way her brother once did. When she disappears and is found under the olive tree, critics noted that the scene was constructed with profound restraint. No dramatic score. No chase. Just a camera observing a woman being gently reclaimed by her past. This moment, many agreed, was where the film's emotional depth crystallized. It's not about losing memory, one critic wrote, but about what memory leaves behind. What it plants. And what still blooms even when names begin to fade. From a thematic standpoint, the film's critical power lies in its quiet explorations of legacy. Legacy in food. In language. In love. The act of cooking is never just culinary. It is liturgical. A ritual through which past, present, and future meet in flour-dusted hands. Critics drew comparisons to Terrence Malick's visual spirituality, to Hirokazu Koreeda's emotional stillness. But unlike many of its contemporaries, this film keeps its feet in the soil. It never drifts into abstraction. The meals are real. The grief is real. The olive oil is poured with shaky hands and tender hearts. Even Leo's journey is not one of triumph, but of softening. In the scene where he chooses to turn down the high-paying job in New York, there is no grand speech. No montage. Just a quiet conversation with Francesca, in which nothing is explicitly decided, but everything is made clear. Critics praised this as a return to emotional honesty. The character's choice feels earned not because of plot points, but because we've lived with him long enough to understand what truly matters now. Francesca herself drew considerable attention from critics for breaking the mold of the typical love interest. She is not a reward, not a catalyst. She is a mirror. Her independence, her rootedness, her guarded warmth, these traits don't melt for Leo. They meet him. And in their meeting, both characters shift. A critic from Milan wrote, "It's rare to see romance portrayed not as escape, but as grounding." Francesca anchors the story without ever trying to shape it. Other moments drew quieter praise. The impromptu meal served under candlelight after the power outage. The way the Nonnas sit in silence before the restaurant opens, holding their breath like actors before a debut. The first time Leo touches Rosa's hand and doesn't speak. These are not plot devices. They're emotional artifacts, each one reflecting the film's central truth, that what matters most often happens in the quiet. And that quiet, as it turns out, reverberated far beyond the screen. Upon release, critics noted how audiences responded with uncharacteristic stillness. In screenings across Europe and North America, viewers sat in their seats after the final scene. Not talking. Not checking their phones. Just sitting. As if the movie hadn't ended, but had opened something instead. For some, it was the memory of a grandmother's kitchen. For others, the realization that something important had been neglected for too long. Film festivals were unprepared for the slow-burning impact. No standing ovations. No thunderous applause. Just something deeper. Quiet tears. Unplanned hugs. The type of reception that doesn't register on applause meters but etches itself into memory. Critics from The Guardian, La Repubblica, and The New Yorker all highlighted the same word in their reflections: intimacy. This film is not intimate in the sense of closeness between people. It's intimate in the way it handles truth. Nothing is dramatized unnecessarily. Pain is not romanticized. Joy is not exaggerated. Everything is allowed to be what it is, raw, imperfect, beautiful. The reception also marked a critical turning point for genre classification. Was it a drama? A culinary story? A coming-of-age tale? A heritage piece? Critics argued that it didn't matter. What mattered was how the film felt, and how it made you feel. That it whispered instead of declared. That it asked instead of answered. That it remembered. And that remembering, in a world obsessed with reinvention, became the most radical act of all. So when you think of this film's critical journey, its strange, quiet rise, its murmured praise, its tender resonance, you don't think of awards or box office tallies, though those came too. You think of the way it honored time. Of how it let its characters grow slowly, like old tomatoes on sunburned vines. She would become the inspiration for Julia. And that kitchen. It wasn't just a backdrop. It became the heart of the production. The filmmakers didn't bring in fake counters or polished props. Everything was real: pans that had been seasoned for decades, hand-carved spoons, a wood-burning stove that took nearly an hour to light each morning but was worth every second for the light it cast and the smell it released. The food wasn't styled. It was cooked by locals. Sometimes on camera, sometimes just for the cast and crew between scenes. It was during one of those meals that something odd happened. Vera Montanari, a non-professional actress playing Maria, swore she saw her late mother in a dream the night before her first shoot day. She was standing in the doorway of the set kitchen, Vera said, smiling, saying, "Make sure they get the sauce right." The next day, when they opened the kitchen door, a strong gust blew through and knocked over a single basil pot placed near the window, something that hadn't happened once in the prior 2 weeks. Vera laughed softly, picked it up, and whispered, "She's watching." The cast grew used to such stories. Props would go missing, only to be found in the exact place someone swore they left it, though no one had been in the room. A rolling pin used in a particularly emotional scene kept showing up in different kitchens, even after being packed away in storage. One crew member, tasked with organizing production gear, found a decades-old photograph tucked inside an unused bread tin, an image of a woman who looked remarkably like one of the actresses. No one could trace where it came from. And then there was the olive tree. It sat at the edge of the town's vineyard, tall and gnarled, with roots that twisted through rock and gravel like veins. It became a centerpiece for one of the most emotional scenes in the film. But what no one expected was the way it bloomed during production. Local farmers said it hadn't produced fruit in nearly 20 years. But halfway through filming, during a week filled with heavy rain and raw performances, the tree suddenly bore small, dark olives. No one could explain it. The crew took it as a sign. The cast, especially those playing the Nonnas, took it as a blessing. And speaking of the Nonnas, the decision to cast real grandmothers from the region was both a gamble and a gift. While several roles were filled by seasoned actors, many of the women cast as the central figures had never acted before in their lives. Some had never even seen a movie. But they brought something no audition could replicate: presence. Truth. Their first few days on set were chaotic, lines forgotten, cameras ignored, timing off. But by the end of the first week, they were improvising scenes that left everyone in tears. One afternoon, during a rehearsal for a dinner scene, the cameras kept rolling without the actresses realizing. They began sharing real stories, about their youth, about wartime, about cooking with children who had long since moved away. None of it was scripted. The director sat behind the monitor and whispered, "Don't touch a thing." That footage made it into the final cut, unedited. Raw. Sacred. Even the animals seemed to play their part. A cat, striped, one ear bent, began showing up every morning just before the first call. It would curl up in the same chair near the kitchen, watch rehearsals, and disappear before sundown. No one knew who it belonged to. It wasn't chipped. It wasn't claimed. One of the producers named it Cameo. When a scene required a cat to leap onto the counter and disrupt a flour-covered Leo mid-baking, the striped visitor did exactly that, unprompted. The moment was kept in the film. Music, too, found its own strange rhythms. The score was planned to be entirely post-production, relying on folk instruments and traditional Italian melodies. But during one scene, an impromptu dance between Leo and Francesca in the town square, a local accordion player began playing nearby, unplanned. The melody was simple, melancholic, a tune his father used to sing. The actors began moving to it without speaking. The moment was captured live. That recording became the film's recurring motif, woven throughout the final score. But the strangest story of all? The tomatoes. During production, the town experienced a late-season heat wave. Crops failed. Fruit withered. But a patch of heirloom tomatoes, planted by the crew in an overgrown plot for a garden scene, began to thrive. No one had expected them to grow. They were supposed to be props. But they flourished. Bright red, sweet, thick-skinned. Local farmers came to taste them, astounded. "These are from the old seed," one said. "The ones we thought were gone." The production chef used them for the final meal scene. The flavor, cast and crew agreed, was like something out of time. Throughout the shoot, there was a sense that the town itself had become part of the storytelling. The church bell, which hadn't rung on schedule in years, began chiming exactly on the hour, as if trying to sync with the script's scenes. An elderly man who hadn't spoken in months joined the extras for the restaurant's reopening, insisting on carrying a tray, smiling the entire time. When asked why he came, he said only, "I remembered the smell of my mother's bread." There were mishaps, of course. A power outage delayed a critical night shoot, but gave way to an unplanned dinner under candlelight that inspired a new scene. A miscommunication with a translator led to an entire market stall being painted the wrong color, but the mistake ended up being more beautiful than the original design. And one of the Nonnas accidentally deleted a day's worth of footage when exploring the playback monitor. But even that led to reshoots that were stronger, richer, more real. None of it felt like coincidence. And maybe that's what made it all feel strange. Not the supernatural, not the unexplained, but the feeling that something wanted this story told. That the ghosts of kitchens long silent had found their voices again through flour and fire and film. When production wrapped, the town held a festa, not just for the film, but for the return of a kind of magic. Tables stretched through the square. Bread was broken. Songs were sung. The striped cat slept beneath the table. And one by one, the Nonnas gave Leo, now fully steeped in their world, a gift. A handwritten recipe, yellowed with age, signed with a kiss of flour. As they left, one of the villagers pressed a note into the director's hand. It was simple, scrawled in faded ink. This wasn't just a story. It was a remembering. And maybe that's the strangest fact of all. That some films aren't made to entertain. They're made to bring something back. To set a table for those we thought were gone. And remind us they never truly left. Some films announce themselves with thunder. Others arrive like a whisper, but leave an echo. This one, built from quiet kitchens, from the rustle of old aprons and the steam rising from handmade pasta, did not come to shout. It came to remind. And in doing so, it carved a place in the hearts of those who watched with more than just their eyes. Critics were not prepared for the way this story unfolded. Nor were they prepared for how deeply it would linger, not as spectacle, but as resonance. Of how it reminded critics and audiences alike that stories do not have to roar to be heard. They can simmer. They can sit with you long after the lights come up. They can be, in their own delicate way, a kind of remembering. Some films are built like machines, precise, calculated, methodical. But others feel like they were grown. Like they started as seeds in the hearts of those who dreamed them up and bloomed slowly, season by season, moment by moment, until something living stood in their place. That's how this film came to be, not engineered but nurtured. From the first idea scrawled on a napkin in a late-night cafe to the final wrap under an olive tree's shadow, its creation was filled not just with work, but with warmth. And more than a few moments of strange, beautiful magic. It all started with a story. A producer, on a visit to southern Italy, was invited to a meal in a tiny hillside village, a Sunday lunch that started at noon and didn't end until sundown. 5 grandmothers cooked in silence and laughter, serving handmade pasta, cured meats, and wine poured without measurement. There was no restaurant, no menu. Just a long wooden table under the sun, and stories told in between bites. He left that lunch not just full, but changed. A week later, the first notes of the film were drafted on the back of a boarding pass, stained with olive oil and espresso. The director was brought on not because of a background in food or romance, but because of a documentary they had once made about disappearing traditions. "This wasn't a movie," they said in their first pitch meeting. "It's a memory. We're not just capturing a story, we're preserving something." The script took shape in fragments. There was never a traditional outline. Just scenes that lived as memories, a grandmother folding pasta with trembling hands, a man burning bread and laughing anyway, a dinner that turned into a dance. The screenwriter described the process as writing with scent, building scenes around smells and sensations rather than plot beats. They'd often test lines of dialogue by reading them aloud while cooking, to make sure they felt true. Casting proved both the greatest challenge and the film's greatest miracle. Finding Leo meant looking for someone who didn't feel like a leading man, but someone who could grow into one without realizing it. Dozens of actors auditioned, but when a little-known theater performer with warm eyes and messy hair read a scene about remembering his grandmother's kitchen, the room fell silent. He wasn't polished. He wasn't perfect. But he belonged. From that moment, he was Leo. The Nonnas, however, were another matter entirely. Initially, the plan was to cast seasoned actresses and age them up or down as needed. But early test readings felt hollow. The performances were good, but the hands weren't. The way the actors chopped vegetables, stirred sauce, held knives, it all felt off. The truth was missing. So, the casting director went back to the village where the story was born. She put out a call not for actors, but for grandmothers. Real ones. Women who'd lived these lives and cooked these meals and lost these memories. Dozens showed up. Not one had acting experience. Most were shy. A few brought cookies. And one, Rosa, yes, that Rosa, recited a prayer when asked to read her lines, then smiled and said, "That's how I start all my cooking." She was cast on the spot. Filming began in early spring. The production rented several abandoned buildings in the village and turned them into housing, storage, and makeshift offices. There was no soundstage. No artificial sets. Everything was filmed in real kitchens, real homes, under real sun and rain. The cinematographer carried 2 cameras, one modern, one vintage. For certain shots, especially the memory sequences, they used an old 16mm camera that hadn't been touched in years. The grain, the warmth, it gave the film something digital couldn't replicate. The crew quickly learned that planning was more suggestion than rule. Scenes would start on time but rarely ended when expected. The Nonnas had no interest in doing second takes if they didn't feel it. "We got it the first time," Julia once said after a particularly moving scene. Why ruin it? Often, the best moments happened off-script. A pot boiling too early. A gust of wind blowing flour across the counter. The cat jumping onto the table mid-shot. None of it was planned. All of it stayed in the final cut. Food was never a prop. Every dish seen on screen was cooked for real and eaten afterward. A team of local chefs worked alongside the cast, but they weren't allowed to take over. Their job was to assist, not direct. "Let them cook," the director insisted. "Even if it's imperfect, it's true." And it showed. The way Leo fumbles with dough. The way Rosa stirs even when the camera isn't rolling. The kitchen became a living, breathing space. A second character. Between takes, the cast and crew ate together. Long lunches, slow evenings. Sometimes scenes would be rewritten over dessert. Sometimes not at all. One pivotal moment, the meal after the flood, was rewritten just hours before filming, after the cast gathered to mourn a friend of one of the villagers who had passed. "We didn't need fiction," the director said. Grief already brought the truth. There were moments of frustration, of course. One day, a donkey wandered onto the set and refused to leave. Another time, a rainstorm flooded the basement holding most of the costume department. The generator failed twice during night shoots. And once, hilariously, the church bell rang 30 minutes early, ruining an emotional take. But the villagers always found a way to help. One lent his tools. Another brought dry clothing. A child offered his soccer ball to distract the donkey. And then there were the blessings in disguise. During one shoot in the vineyard, the crew lost light too quickly. The scene, Leo confessing his fear of failure to Francesca, was on the verge of being rescheduled. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, a string of lanterns lit up along the path. No one had asked for them. No one had planned it. Turns out, the vineyard owner thought they were part of the production and lit them out of kindness. The result? A golden, flickering glow that became one of the most beautiful shots in the film. Music, too, found its place in unexpected ways. While a composer had already begun crafting the score back in Rome, the director encouraged live music on set. Local musicians were invited to play during lunch breaks. One, an accordionist named Matteo, began improvising during rehearsals. The melody he played, soft, mournful, like a lullaby for the past, became the film's recurring theme. They recorded it live, with birds chirping in the background. No studio could have replicated it. Post-production was slow. Not because of delay, but because no one wanted to rush. Editors sifted through hundreds of hours of footage, much of it improvised. Some scenes had no dialogue, just movement, breath, silence. These were kept. In one instance, an entire scene was built from outtakes. Leo helping Rosa sit down, adjusting her apron, brushing flour from her cheek. None of it scripted. All of it true. The premiere was held not in a grand cinema, but in the village where it all began. A projector was mounted in the square. The entire town showed up. The Nonnas wore their finest dresses. The cat, somehow, was there too. And when the final scene played, Leo holding Rosa's recipe in trembling hands, the crowd fell silent. Then applause. Then tears. One villager turned to the director and said, "You gave us back our story." Later, when the film traveled to international festivals, critics were stunned by its intimacy. Reviewers asked about the lighting design, the set dressing, the precise direction of the performances. The team just smiled. "That wasn't direction," they said. "That was life. There are 1,000 little things that happened along the way. A broken spoon kept for luck. A recipe that changed mid-shoot because someone misread the handwriting. A dance that started off-camera and ended in the script. The striped cat, of course, who made it into the credits as Il Gatto." But what matters most, what every member of that crew remembers, is how the film felt. Like something guided. Not controlled. Not choreographed. But invited. Welcomed. Like a story that had been waiting patiently for the right hands to tell it. And when they did, when they rolled camera and rolled dough and rolled back the layers of tradition and time, something extraordinary happened. They didn't just make a movie. They set a table. And somehow, we were all invited to sit down. Some settings announce themselves boldly. Towering cities, sweeping landscapes, castles veiled in mist. But then there are places that whisper. Places that don't shout for attention, but instead seep into your skin. The kind of place where you don't need a map to know your way because your heart knows it already. The village at the center of this story is one of those places. And from the first frame, it doesn't just hold the film, it becomes the film. Every stone, every shadow, every window cracked open to let in the scent of rosemary tells its own quiet story. At first glance, the village might seem like a postcard. Winding cobblestone streets that look like they've been walked for centuries. Crumbling walls with ivy spilling over them like secrets. Laundry hanging from balconies in mismatched lines, swaying like flags of resilience. There's a stillness to it, not the kind of stillness born from silence, but the kind born from knowing. The place doesn't ask you to rush. It won't let you. Time doesn't tick here. It lingers. The decision to shoot in a real, unspoiled Italian village rather than fabricate one on a set was no coincidence. It was essential. The filmmakers didn't want to create atmosphere. They wanted to capture one that already existed. A place that could cradle the story like a grandmother cradling dough in her hands. That authenticity pulses through every frame. You can feel the heat of the stone walls at noon, the chill of the kitchen tiles in the early morning, the golden hush of the sun as it slips past terracotta roofs at dusk. Each location was chosen not just for its beauty, but for its soul. The kitchen, of course, is the heart. Not just architecturally, but emotionally. It's where stories are stirred into sauce and silence speaks louder than words. The kitchen wasn't dressed or designed, it was inherited. Real pots, real steam, real chipped tiles that tell of decades of spills and scolds and bread rising under tea towels. It's cluttered, but never messy. Worn, but never tired. And when the camera settles there, it feels less like it's observing and more like it's remembering. The filmmakers used light with reverence here. Natural sunlight filters in through lace curtains, soft and warm and unassuming. It bathes countertops in gold during the day and fades gently at dusk, replaced by the soft flicker of candles or the dim glow of an old bulb swinging from the ceiling. There's no harsh lighting, no artificial glow. Just illumination that feels like it belongs. It doesn't reveal, it invites. Cinematography became a language of its own. The camera rarely cuts aggressively. It lingers. It drifts. It often sits just behind a character's shoulder or watches them from the end of a hallway, as if giving them space to breathe. It moves through the village not like a tourist, but like a memory retracing its steps. A hand trailing across a stone wall. Eyes following the curve of a staircase worn smooth by generations. There are no sweeping crane shots or dizzying Steadicam runs. Just patient observation. And in that patience, mood is born. Scenes unfold in real time. A tomato is sliced slowly, seed slipping onto wood. A Nonna hums an old lullaby while stirring polenta, her voice barely louder than the spoon scraping the pot. A breeze stirs a curtain. A bell rings from the church on the hill. These aren't background details. They are the scene. They carry the weight of lived experience. They make you feel not like a viewer, but a guest. The outdoor settings offer a contrast, but they carry the same intimacy. The vineyard, with its rows of gnarled vines, stretches across rolling hills that blush pink in the morning. It's where characters go not to perform, but to reflect. Conversations here are slower, quieter, often without conclusion. The landscape doesn't push toward drama, it gives space for feeling to rise. The light, again, does most of the talking. It catches in hair, dances on wine glasses, makes even the dust motes seem choreographed. One of the most striking visual choices is how the village changes without ever changing. At first, it feels sun-bleached and sleepy. But as Leo settles in, the same streets begin to feel different. Warmer. More alive. The walls don't brighten. The colors don't shift. But the way the camera sees them does. That subtle evolution, how the same setting transforms through familiarity, is where the emotional intelligence of the film truly shines. There's a rhythm to the visuals that echoes the rhythm of cooking. Slow builds, long simmering, flashes of heat and sudden silence. Editing isn't used to hurry the story, it's used to breathe. Some shots last longer than expected. A grandmother looking out the window. A spoon resting in a bowl. A glance across the table. These aren't mistakes or indulgences. They're pauses. And they let the audience feel the texture of the world. Sound design works hand in hand with the visuals to complete this immersion. There's no swelling score to manipulate emotion. Music is used sparingly, often woven into the scene itself, a radio playing a folk tune, an accordion drifting through an open window. More often, it's the ambient sounds that carry the emotional weight, a knife tapping rhythmically on wood, the rustle of herbs in a mortar, the bubbling of water in a pot just before it boils. Silence is never empty. It's filled with the hum of life. Even the rain has a role. When the storm hits and the kitchen floods, the sound shifts. It doesn't roar, it drowns. The patter of rain becomes a drumbeat, soft but relentless. The patter of rain becomes a drumbeat, soft but relentless. The echo of water against tile becomes a kind of mourning. The camera doesn't flinch away. It watches the ruin unfold with stillness, allowing the viewer to feel the full weight of what's been lost. But it's what follows that redefines the setting. The restoration. The rebuilding. Walls are scrubbed, shelves remade, windows opened. And as the kitchen is restored, it doesn't return to what it was. It becomes something new. The setting evolves along with the characters, not in dramatic redesign, but in feeling. It breathes again, but differently. Wiser. Softer. Braver. Then there's the square, the open heart of the village, where markets bustle, conversations spark, and unexpected dances begin. The final scenes take place here, under lanterns strung between buildings like stars lowered just for the night. The colors are warm, the camera movements looser, the atmosphere like a sigh of contentment. It's a visual celebration without extravagance. Joy held in small moments, a child biting into bread, a grandmother laughing at a spilled drink, Leo catching Francesca's eye across the crowd. All of this, the setting, the light, the sound, the pacing, comes together not to decorate the story, but to hold it. The village is not backdrop. It's not a stage. It's a character of its own. It challenges, comforts, shelters, and teaches. It ages with the people inside it. It remembers. And because of that, so do we. Because we've all known places like this. A kitchen that feels like a sanctuary. A path you walk not to go somewhere, but to return to yourself. A chair by the window where someone once sat, always. This film doesn't show us a world. It invites us into one. And by the end, the village doesn't just feel real. It feels like home. Some productions hum with a kind of secret joy, something you can't script, can't stage, can't rehearse. It bubbles up between takes, spills over during late dinners and misty mornings. And long before a film becomes what the audience sees on screen, it breathes through the lives of those who built it together. On this set, behind the flower-dusted tables and ancient walls, the magic was not just in the story being told, but in how it unfolded when the cameras weren't rolling. From the very beginning, there was something unusual about how things came together. This wasn't a blockbuster operation. There were no trailers parked in rows, no massive crews calling out cues over walkie-talkies. This was something smaller, quieter. The kind of shoot where everyone knew each other's names, where the crew shared meals not because it was convenient, but because they wanted to. Every morning started with espresso, pulled by a local cafe owner who insisted on personally delivering it to the set. "You're telling our story," he'd say. "You should stay awake for it." The village they filmed in was not a location. It was a host. A participant. The people who lived there didn't just tolerate the disruption, they embraced it. Many offered their homes as shooting locations. Others showed up daily to bring baskets of bread, fresh herbs, or their own family's recipes. One Nonna, who wasn't cast but had auditioned, visited every other day with a different type of biscotti and a new piece of advice. "Make sure the pasta water tastes like the sea," she'd say. "And never trust a man who salts after it boils." The real-life Nonnas who were cast became the soul of the set. They didn't always understand the technical side of things, why they had to do the same scene multiple times, or why the camera had to move slowly, but they understood the heart of it. They brought a grounding energy that shaped the entire pace of the production. If a scene wasn't working, if the energy felt off, someone would say, "Let's take 5, and they'd all sit together in the kitchen, drinking coffee and talking like family. They weren't acting. They were being. One of the more hilarious challenges involved communication. Most of the crew spoke some Italian, and many of the Nonnas spoke only dialects, sometimes so thick and musical they sounded like another language entirely. The solution. A teenager from the village, fluent in both English and the local dialect, became the unofficial translator. He was paid in pizza and PlayStation gift cards, and quickly became the most important person on set. "He saved us," the director later joked. And he corrected everyone's pronunciation. Then there was the food. Oh, the food. The crew had assumed they'd bring in a catering team, maybe rotate a few local chefs. But the Nonnas wouldn't have it. They insisted on cooking. Not just for scenes, but for everyone. Lunch became sacred. Filming would pause, tables would be set, and they'd serve steaming bowls of whatever was fresh that day. One afternoon, they made a frittata so good the sound operator cried. Literally cried. Everyone thought it was exhaustion, until he said through tears, "My grandmother used to make this. I haven't tasted it since I was 10. And those lunches weren't just meals. They were rehearsals. Improvisation sessions. Therapy." The cast and crew would talk about their own families, their own food memories. Slowly, the lines between character and self began to blur. Leo's actor, who had never made pasta before the film, started showing up early just to cook with Rosa. She teased him endlessly about his knife skills but called him her sixth grandson after the second week. Francesca's actress had a different relationship with the kitchen. She was shy at first. Nervous. But one of the Nonnas noticed how she always stayed behind after lunch, helping clear dishes and quietly listening to stories. Julia, ever the mischief maker, decided to trick her into opening up. She created a scene, completely improvised, where the actress had to cook during a monologue. It wasn't scripted, but they rolled camera anyway. What came out was raw, hesitant, beautiful. That take made it into the final film. Not everything went smoothly, of course. The weather was a constant wild card. One week, they had planned an outdoor scene in the vineyard, a soft, golden moment between Leo and Francesca. But a sudden storm rolled in from the coast, drenching the set and turning the vineyard into a swamp. At first, there was panic. Gear had to be covered, costumes changed. But instead of scrapping the scene, they rewrote it. Leo and Francesca, soaked to the bone, sharing a bottle of wine under a makeshift tarp. It became one of the most beloved scenes in the film. Sometimes, the story has a better idea than the script. Another day, the generator failed during a night shoot. Instead of canceling, the team lit the entire scene with lanterns and candles. The DP and director worked in near silence, letting the actors explore the scene without interruption. The result? A dinner scene that flickered with warmth and intimacy, the kind of visual poetry you can't fake. "It felt like we were filming a memory," said the assistant director. One someone had forgotten, until it showed up again in candlelight. Then there was the cat. It showed up on day 3. Gray, one eye slightly drooped, calm as anything. No one claimed it, but it followed the crew everywhere. It slept on camera bags, curled up on costumes, even made its way into scenes, always at the perfect moment. Eventually, they named it Il Regista, the director, because it seemed to know exactly when to walk into frame and steal focus. "It hit its marks better than most actors," someone joked. There were smaller moments, too, the kind that never make the press notes but live in the memory of everyone who was there. A dance party in the kitchen after a late wrap. A surprise birthday celebration for Rosa, who turned 80 during the final week of filming. A day when the village priest stopped by with homemade wine and blessed the set, not because anyone asked, but because this story feels holy. Perhaps the most touching moment came on the last day. The cast and crew gathered in the village square to shoot the final scene, the long table, the lights, the food, the laughter. It wasn't choreographed. They let it play out like a real meal. The camera weaved through the crowd, catching moments as they happened. Toasts, hugs, children sneaking extra bread. And when the director finally called, "Cut," no one moved. They just kept sitting, kept eating, kept being. The sun went down. The lights stayed up. And for one last evening, it wasn't a movie. It was a family. When they finally packed up and said goodbye, each member of the crew was gifted a handwritten recipe from one of the Nonnas. Not typed, not photocopied, written in pen, often with little doodles in the margins. "To remember," they said, "in case you forget how to feel full." And maybe that's what the film was all along. Not a production, but a remembering. Of kitchens that smelled like love. Of conversations that didn't need to end in answers. Of people who didn't act, but shared. And long after the lights were taken down, and the set was swept, and the cameras were boxed away, the story kept simmering in the hearts of everyone who was there. And maybe, if you listen closely enough, in the clink of a spoon in a quiet kitchen somewhere, it still does. Some films are built on dialogue, others on drama. But every once in a while, a film emerges that speaks in glances, in gestures, in the rustle of a curtain or the creak of an old chair. A film where meaning simmers quietly beneath the surface, never shouted but always present, like the scent of garlic long after dinner is over. This story is one of those rare films. It doesn't announce its themes with sweeping monologues or moral declarations. Instead, it lets them unfold slowly, like dough rising under a linen cloth. Quiet, patient, full of life. At its heart, this film is about inheritance. Not the kind measured in bank accounts or deeds, but in memory, in tradition, in hands that remember how to shape a recipe before the mind does. The kitchen becomes more than a space, it's a time machine, a portal. Within those warm, slightly cracked walls, generations bleed into one another. What one woman once whispered to her daughter while stirring sauce is now passed to a stranger in flour-dusted jeans. And that act, the passing down, is the soul of the story. Leo, the outsider who walks into this world of scent and silence, begins with no awareness of what he's about to receive. He arrives looking for escape, for novelty, for maybe a little healing. But what he finds instead is weight. Not a burden, but a responsibility. To listen, to absorb, and eventually to carry forward. His character arc is not one of conquest, but of conversion. He is not changed by grand revelation, but by the slow, steady presence of people who remember. Which leads to the film's most persistent theme, memory. Memory runs through every layer of this story. It's not presented as linear, or even reliable. Instead, memory here is a texture. Rosa's fading recollections. Julia's jokes that trace back to a story she never finishes. Maria's silences that hold more truth than words ever could. These women carry memory in their bones. And through them, we see how fragile it is. How easy it is to lose. And how sacred it becomes once you realize it's slipping away. The food itself becomes symbolic of this fragility. Recipes are never written down. They live in repetition, in instinct, in knowing when the dough feels right rather than looks right. Every dish becomes a stand-in for a history that isn't documented anywhere else. The first time Leo tries to replicate a meal from memory and fails, it's not played for comedy. It's a moment of quiet defeat. But when he finally succeeds, not by precision, but by feeling, it's a moment of profound inheritance. He isn't just cooking. He's remembering something that was never his but now lives through him. This theme of memory is visually supported throughout the film. Photographs on walls. Faded newspaper clippings. A wooden spoon worn smooth by decades of use. These objects aren't highlighted with fanfare. They sit in the background, steady and unchanging. But they ground the film in the idea that everything we do now is built on something that came before. That we are, all of us, unfinished echoes of the people who shaped us. Another theme that pulses through the film is time. But not in the ticking clock sense. This story doesn't count time. It dwells in it. Scenes linger longer than most modern films allow. A spoon stirring, a loaf rising, a child watching steam curl toward the ceiling. In doing so, the film teaches us to slow down, to notice, to taste life again. This is not just a stylistic choice, it's thematic. Time, here, is not a threat. It's a gift. And the people who understand that best are the ones who have the least of it left. The Nonnas embody this understanding. They aren't in a rush because they know what matters. They don't multitask. They don't divide attention. When they cook, they cook. When they tell a story, they tell it from beginning to end, even if it takes all afternoon. This slowness is a kind of rebellion against the world Leo comes from, a world of immediacy, of performance, of forgetting. And in their presence, he begins to learn that time is not something to escape. It's something to honor. The olive tree becomes a key symbol of this relationship with time. It stands at the edge of the village, gnarled and ancient, having witnessed more than any character in the film. It becomes the silent observer of Rosa's most vulnerable moment, when she disappears and is found beneath its branches. That scene is layered with symbolism. The olive tree doesn't just represent age, it represents endurance. Roots that dig deep. Fruit that takes decades to mature. And Rosa, in her forgetfulness, is drawn to it, not out of fear or confusion, but out of instinct, as if the tree remembers what she no longer can. The recurring image of the table also holds deep symbolic weight, not just as a setting, but as a metaphor. Tables, in this film, are where things happen, where change begins, where love is offered without words. Every major emotional beat takes place at or around a table. The first awkward meal, the chaotic kitchen floods, the candlelit recovery dinner, and finally, the celebration at the end. The table is not a place of drama. It's a place of communion, not in the religious sense, but in the human one. To sit and eat together is, in this world, the most sacred act. That sacredness extends to the use of hands throughout the film. Many of the film's most powerful scenes unfold with no dialogue, no score. Just silence. When Rosa walks through the garden alone. When Leo kneads dough in the early morning, the only sound his breath. When Francesca stands in her doorway, unsure whether to speak or let the moment pass. In these silences, the film finds its truest voice. It invites the audience not just to observe, but to join. To sit in that stillness, to remember their own silences. Even the camera lenses were chosen with care. Instead of crisp modern lenses, the cinematographer opted for slightly imperfect vintage glass that created subtle vignetting and softness at the edges. Faces appeared warmer, backgrounds more dreamlike. These lenses mimicked the look of memory, clear at the center, but gently fading around the borders. It gave the entire film a sense of something remembered, not performed. This visual language, sound design, and editorial style culminated in a film that didn't feel like a film. It felt like time. Time remembered. Time lost. Time found again. And audiences felt it. Which brings us to the unexpected beauty of its box office journey. No one expected the film to be a hit. It had no car chases, no high-concept pitch, no household name stars. It premiered quietly at a regional film festival, where its biggest theater was a converted barn. But something happened in that barn. Word spread. People returned to see it twice, 3 times. Journalists wrote about it like a secret passed from hand to hand. It moved slowly, like its story. But it moved. Within 3 months, it had sold out art house screenings in Milan, Florence, New York, Montreal. Theaters began serving Italian snacks at showings, hosting dinners inspired by the film. Viewers brought their parents, their grandparents. Stories emerged of people reconnecting with estranged relatives, dusting off old cookbooks, cooking meals not for Instagram, but for each other. Something had shifted. By the end of its run, the film had grossed 10 times its modest production budget. It wasn't the highest-grossing film of the year, but it was one of the most revisited. It stayed in small theaters longer than blockbusters. Its box office wasn't built on hype, it was built on return, on memory, on longing. Critics struggled to classify it. Some called it a food film, others a love story. Some called it slow. Others called it sacred. But the audience knew better. They didn't come to watch action. They came to feel presence. They came to remember something they hadn't realized they'd forgotten. And maybe that's the real filmmaking magic here. That in an era of speed and spectacle, someone slowed down, lit a candle, rolled out dough, and made a story that didn't just show you a world. It welcomed you home to it. There are films that live or die by the power of their premise, others by the strength of their script. But this one found its soul in the people who carried it, not just in the characters they played, but in the lives they brought with them, in the voices that cracked at the right moment, in the laughter that broke through a scene unscripted, and in the long silences that were never written, yet said everything. When casting began, the process didn't begin with auditions. It began with listening. The filmmakers weren't searching for perfect line readers or red carpet resumes. They were looking for presence, for people who could hold a frame without forcing it, for actors who didn't just understand the script but understood why the story needed to be told at all. Leo, the film's anchor, wasn't an obvious choice. He hadn't headlined a major project, hadn't been a regular on television. He was a theater actor, mostly known in indie circles for his ability to vanish into roles. He had kind eyes, a quiet way of speaking. And when he read a monologue from the kitchen scene, the one where Leo confesses he can't even make toast without burning it, there was a pause in the audition room, a silence that no one wanted to break. The director looked up and said, "You've already cooked the whole meal, haven't you?" And just like that, he was cast. In interviews, he spoke about preparing for the role not by memorizing recipes, but by unlearning his need to control. "I went to culinary school briefly, years ago," he said. "I thought I knew how to cook. But these women, they didn't cook with rules. They cooked with memory. I had to learn how to forget the structure and trust the feeling." He shadowed real grandmothers in small towns for weeks before filming. Chopped in silence. Burned things. Learned to listen not just to instruction, but to breath, to rhythm, to intuition. Francesca's actress, Elena Moretti, had a longer resume. A fixture in Italian cinema, known for her nuanced portrayals of complex women. But she nearly turned the role down.